So this session, it's going to be a full overview of all of the finance applications from Zoho. This is kind of a basic roadmap of all of the different functionalities or modules within the finance suite. But of course, we have applications that are different than the exact titles of these modules. So what I'll try to do is, as we go through the different modules, I'll also point out what apps inside the finance suite those functionalities are part of. So with that, let's get to the basics. And when I say the basics, I mean really the basics. What is accounting? The systematic recording of financial information pertaining to a business. And if you guys don't currently do that, then you're probably not in business. But an accounting application is designed to facilitate this. Now, accounting systems overall, right, if we think about the premise of an accounting system, they haven't really changed since the days of like ledgers. The essential idea is that you're recording money as it comes in to your business and as it leaves your business. And then you want to categorize that money so you know what specific aspects of your business that it's a part of, whether that's inventory, whether you are paying your employees, whether you're paying expenses, whether you're making sales. You want to know what bucket that falls in. Call them charts of accounts, right? And so a chart of accounts is outlined specific to your organization. There's some really common accounts that you'll be utilizing. And many of you have probably noticed that when you set up Zoho Books, there was already a chart of accounts there. And there are many default accounts that are required for the system to operate, but you can customize that as much as possible for your specific organization. So before we get into the products, I just really want to set the stage for how Zoho frames the applications and why we've built them in the way that we have. So traditionally, accounting software has really been designed for accounting professionals. The idea behind being able to record all of your financial transactions has a lot to do with how well trained you were in business finances. And for most business owners, that's not our strong suit. When we think about accounting, we typically think about debits and credits. We typically think about kind of this monolithic or standalone product. A lot of times, desktop applications, right? How many people here have ever used a desktop accounting system in their business? Yes, almost everyone. And when we think about Zoho Books, we think about the ability to utilize your phone, ability to utilize your Apple Watch to actually do accounting, which is really kind of fascinating. But at the end of the day, you're doing the exact same thing that has been done for ages, right? So even though I'm not going in and recording my debits and credits for these different accounts, I am recording transactions that translate those actions into debits and credits. And that's what Zoho Books really tries to do, which is design an application more specifically for business owners who can quickly log the transactions that they need, not be intimidated by the user interface or what they're doing. But of course, there's also some advanced functionality that accountants need, that financial administrators need for that organization. So you'll notice that Zoho Books has advanced functions built within it, or you can get into something like Zoho Analytics and go crazy with all of your reporting. This is the finance suite as we stand today. The dates above them are the release dates. So way back in 2008, when I was in like junior high or something, we released Zoho Invoice. Zoho Invoice and Zoho Books are often confused, and I want to here and now settle that confusion. So the basics, Zoho Invoice is a complete accounts receivable application, right? It's designed for folks who are trying to receive online payments from their customers. It has some basic expense management, but it doesn't have a chart of accounts. It doesn't have an accounts payable portion. Zoho Books, on the other hand, has all of the accounts receivable functionality put into it, but it also has a full accounts payable module. It has a chart of accounts. It has expense management. And what that allows you to do is you can actually calculate profitability for your business, which is pretty important. And Zoho Books is that tool. So you wouldn't use both, right? You would use either Zoho Invoice if you have a legacy accounting system that you can't let go of. And then when you're ready, you can actually switch over to Books. Of course, I always recommend, if you can, start off with Zoho Books, because that lets you get into the entirety of what you'll need for your financial transactions. With that, we have subscriptions and expense that came out in 2014 and 15. Zoho Inventory also came out in 2015. And more recently, we have Zoho Checkout. And then finally, Zoho Payroll initially was released in California in 2018, 2019 for Texas, and India was this year as well. So that is the finance suite as it stands today. But how do they interact with each other? Zoho Books really is the central tool, right? It has the nuts and bolts of everything you'll need to operate your business finances. Now, that means that Zoho Books has a basic inventory module, which some of you guys may be using as of today. But if you have any type of complexity in your inventory management, whether that requires multi-warehouse, whether that requires grouping items together, right? If you're selling jackets and they are different sizes, it's really the same jacket, but you have some type of criteria that divides them. You can use an application like Zoho Inventory to expand that module of Zoho Books. Now, in typical Zoho fashion, you can use any of the applications as a standalone product if you'd like, but you really get more functionality out of it by integrating it with other tools like Zoho Books. So you also have tools like subscriptions, which you guys already know that I love. Zoho Books actually has a recurring invoice module, right? So you can set up scheduled invoices to be sent out to your clients, but subscriptions dials that up to 11, gives you the ability to set up the way that you can manage failed payments, reaching out to customers with credit cards that are going to be expiring. And then it also gives you a bunch of analytics that are forward-looking, right? So an accounting system is primarily stuff that's already happened. Subscription management gets you into the realm of things that are going to happen. So monthly recurring revenue, right? Annual revenue per user, a lifetime value, things like that. And then expense. So this is really simple. Zoho Books is primarily where you're recording your overhead expenses for your organization. Zoho Expense is the tool that allows your employees to record travel and business expenses and then submit those into a report and give them to their manager who can then go through them. You can set up a hierarchy where it goes to one manager, then the next. So I use Zoho Expense every day at Zoho pretty much. For my mobile app, I take a picture of a receipt. It'll auto-scan the amount, the date, and the merchant. And then when I wrap all of my expenses together, like for this trip, I'll call it Zoholics 2019. I'll put all my steak dinners in there. I'll submit it to my manager. He will then question me on all of them. And, and we'll have this back and forth all inside Zoho Expense. And then I'll finally squeeze out some part of my reimbursement. Zoho CRM and Zoho Finance. So I just want to touch on this briefly before we jump into the modules. This is actually fairly simple for how it functions, but it has a pretty large impact on the way that you can run your business. So inside of Zoho CRM, we all know that you have this basic structure of accounts and contacts. And what that allows you to do is organize your customers in terms of the businesses you work with and the people who are inside those organizations, right? That's the basic structure. Zoho Books integrates with Zoho CRM, and it allows you to either build those accounts or those contacts directly from CRM. And what that means is you can actually set up estimates, invoices, sales orders. So let's say you have salespeople in your organization, or you are also that salesperson, and you want to work out of CRM. You can create those transactions there, and they immediately are available in Zoho Books. And then as the customer, let's say they make a payment, they use the online integrations you have for Stripe or PayPal, and that transaction gets marked as paid, then those status updates go all the way back up to CRM. Now, there's also a client portal in the Finance Suite. Hopefully, many of you are using that. Let's say your client decides they need to update their shipping address because they've moved. If they update that shipping address in the client portal, it'll update automatically in Zoho Books, it'll update automatically in CRM, and all the other tools that are connected to it. So that's some of the ways where you can actually integrate the tools. It's simple functionality, but it helps in some really huge ways. We're going to take a look at that a little bit deeper in a few minutes later in the session. Now, the other tools like subscriptions, they tie into CRM, so you can actually create or see live subscriptions that your clients have from the CRM tool. Zoho Inventory integrates with CRM, and it allows you to see orders that customer has that are currently placed, items that have been shipped. So let's say a customer calls, and typically they're going to speak with the salesperson that initially gave them the deal. That salesperson doesn't have to reach out to someone in finance or the inventory team. They can go into CRM and see all those details there. That's really the way that integration works. Expense, that one is probably one of the most useful tools in the CRM integration. So let's say you take a client out for lunch and you're going to take a picture of your receipt, right? In Zoho Expense, you can see your CRM accounts inside of Zoho Expense. I can associate this expense with them. I can charge them for that expense, but that would be a pretty strange lunch to be taken to. But then when I go ahead and submit that expense, it'll show up automatically in that account in CRM. So not only does it go to your expense report that they'll submit and eventually to Zoho Books, but you're keeping track of all of those expenses in CRM pertaining to that account. So you could run a report in CRM that tells you your revenue for that specific account and the expenditure that you have for how many steak dinners you've had to take them out to. You can tell I like steak. Now let's actually jump into Zoho Finance. So we'll talk about just some different tools overall, and then we'll look at how each tool can actually utilize that functionality. So we have contact management. This is obviously super simple, right? Adding contacts. One of the main things I want to let you guys know is that the contacts that you add, whether they're in Zoho Books, they're the same as the contacts that you'll see in Zoho Inventory and Expense, right? It synchronizes across all of them. And then when you set up the CRM integration, what you're actually able to do is map the fields from your Zoho CRM account into the fields that are required for that contact in the Zoho Finance apps. So let's say there's some piece of information you're collecting for that customer in CRM. When you set up that integration, you guys may have seen this. There's a mapping field, right? So there's a series of drop-downs on one side that are Zoho CRM, a series of drop-downs on the other that are books, and then you can match across those fields. So you can actually bring in data from CRM that way. Of course, you can manage outstanding sales for these customers. That means that inside of Zoho CRM, there's actually a way to see the total receivables and outstanding receivables for a client. And that's information coming from the finance tool, not just the sales data that a salesperson has entered, but that's coming from your accounting tool into CRM. And then, of course, you can streamline communication with customers. So setting up workflows that automatically notify a customer when they have a bill that's due, whether that's setting it up for a subscription that they need to renew, or I don't know if you guys saw this, but we recently came out with an integration, a direct integration with Twilio, where you can do text messages to your clients directly from within Zoho Books. So if you need to notify them of any changes to their account, or you need to tell them to hurry up and pay their bill, you can do that. All right, stock management. So inside of the Zoho Books and inventory applications, of course, you can manage stocks. One of the most important things to keep in mind here is that Zoho Inventory allows you to do quite a number of more advanced groupings of those items. So inside of Zoho Book, it's designed to be just really simple in adding in individual items that you are selling. But inside of Zoho Inventory, what you can do is you can actually bundle items together. So you can create kits. The kit actually has its own SKU. And whenever you sell that item, it'll reduce the individual quantities of whatever's inside of it. You can, of course, also create item groups, as I mentioned. So that's not listed up here, but that is creating an item matrix, right? So as I talked about with the t-shirts or jackets, if I'm selling a bunch of Zoho shirts, they're small, medium, large, and they come in white, blue, and black, I can actually create a matrix of just Zoho shirts with all of those different options, and I can monitor all of their individual item levels, even though it's the same item. And then setting up price lists. So this can be done either in books or inventory, but you can set up price lists that you can associate to customers. So this is either a percentage markup or markdown on the entire list of prices you have by default, or you can set individual prices for individual products. And either you can associate them to customers or you can apply them at the invoice or sales order level. And then this is some more interesting stuff. So inside of Zoho Inventory, if you use a barcode scanner or if you use the Zoho Inventory mobile app, you can actually scan SKUs. If you also have an RFID scanner hooked up to the computer that you're using, you can also scan RFID badges if your products have those directly into Zoho Inventory as well. So this is a real quick recap. So Zoho Books items module designed to be simple. It does the basics, right? Calculating inventory, lets you know when you need to reorder items. And then Zoho Inventory allows you to get quite a bit more complex, right? Integrate with shipping carriers. So there are dozens of different shipping carriers. The ones most relevant to us here in the United States are listed there. We also relatively recently came out finally with a USPS integration. So that is also listed there. But of course, DHL, FedEx, On Track, all those are listed there as well. E-commerce, I just want to mention this very quickly. You guys may already know Zoho Inventory has a direct integration with Shopify. And so what you can do there is you are able to have orders placed on your website, and sales orders are automatically generated in Zoho Inventory. That sales order is also carried over to Zoho Books, and you are able to then move down the pipeline. So an invoice is created that is also available in Zoho Books. And when the quantity of that item is reduced, it's reduced across all of your sales channels. So whether that's your website, or let's say you're selling on Amazon or eBay or Etsy. Basically, their advertisement should be when you can't find it on Amazon. So anyways, I dusted off my old eBay login. It still has 100% feedback. Very proud of that. And on my desk, work at Zoho, I have this stress ball that I got from a trade show. And it has a different company's branding on it, so I probably shouldn't have listed it. I listed it on my eBay account, and I integrated that with Zoho Inventory. I actually put a quantity of 2 and listed on inventory on eBay, and then I did an internal sales order in Zoho Inventory. I reduced that quantity to 1, so it worked across all of my sales channels, right? So everything was working. I did the webinar. It was totally fine. A week later, I got an email saying my item had sold. Totally forgot about it. There was a slight bidding war. I'd gone up to like 23 cents. And someone from Massachusetts bought my mango-shaped stress ball. And for some reason, I had listed free priority shipping. And, and to keep my 100% feedback, I sent it to who I believe was a woman in like Boston. And you know what's funny is that I didn't even actually take a picture of the mango because I was too lazy to like take it from my phone and move it to my computer. I just Googled like mango, and there was a stock image of a real mango like cut open, and that's what I put. So that's my story of Zoho Inventory and eBay. All right, billing management. This is very simple. So across the finance applications, right, there's a number of different places you are going to be managing your receivables. So this ranges from generating sales orders or invoices in Zoho Books to actually having those automatically created in Zoho Inventory, or having invoices automatically created from Zoho subscriptions. You are also able to have each of these applications move their information over without having to actually integrate it. So what I mean by that is, if I'm looking at a sales order that's in Zoho Inventory, that is immediately available in Zoho Books. CRM works the same way. One thing that you'll notice is when you're actually in CRM and you're generating a sales order or invoice, you're actually working inside of essentially Zoho Books. It's the same exact options, so there's no sync delay there. I know sometimes people ask about that. The only kind of syncing between the finance apps and CRM is with the actual contact information. So if something changes, like their address, that can take up to a couple hours. You can actually prompt that to happen right away if you'd like. But otherwise, all of the actual transactional data is in instant sync. You can set up flexible pricing models in applications like subscriptions. Some of the functionality is going to be moving over to products like Zoho Inventory. But for example, in subscriptions, you can actually set up a volume-based price discount. And I know like more than a handful of you walked over to the booth and said, I need volume-based price discount. But that is currently available in subscriptions, but that functionality will be moving over to other tools within the finance suite. We already talked about bundling, and then of course flat billing. Customizing templates, also super basic, right? But you have the ability to set up custom templates across all of the different billing options you have, whether they're inside books or inventory or subscriptions. And I've seen people do some really interesting things with these, right? You can actually change the templates on the fly when you're actually generating the documents themselves. But more recently, I saw in Zoho Books and Inventory, you have the ability to create custom templates. I'm not sure if you guys have used those. You can actually insert things like the product image into the line item. So if you want to actually show those on the invoice, you can now do that by setting up a custom template for your invoice. Automating this quote to cash process, that's basically the functionality that allows you to automatically send an email to the customer that includes a payment link. Sometimes this confuses people. So invoices can be sent automatically to a customer and they can click on a button that says pay now. They don't have to have an account in the portal. Estimates, however, they do have to have an account in the portal to accept before they go in. And the reasoning behind that is that may be a contractual obligation. You need to know exactly who they are. But if someone wants to give you money, then that's pretty easy. So that's the difference kind of in those two options. So estimates, sales orders, invoice. You don't have to use estimates and sales orders, right? Invoices are a required module, which of course you need to send invoices if you want to make money. But you'll notice that in Zoho Books or in Inventory, if you go into settings and preferences, there are a number of modules you can enable or disable if you're not going to be utilizing them. Sometimes people get a little bit hung up on the difference between, why would I need to generate a sales order? If you use Zoho Inventory, you have to generate sales orders. That's required. And the main rationale behind this is that a sales order can have multiple invoices, right? So you can have a partially fulfilled sales order. So a sales order is when your customer is placing an order with you. A purchase order is something you'd send to your vendor, and then they would create a sales order based off your purchase order. So what a purchase order gets converted to is a bill, right? A sales order gets converted into an invoice. It's a difference there. And then so for example, on the purchase order example, let's say I send out a purchase order to my vendor for 10 widgets. They only send me back 5 because that's all they have in stock. And I have to pay for those 5. I can partially bill the 5 that I received, and then the other 5 are still pending. And so Zoho Books will actually keep track of all of those pending transactions until you actually close them. So the same goes for sales orders in the reverse. So we talked about this, the difference between Zoho Books and Invoice, right? Books is the full accounts payable module, of course has the banking integrations, and you have the ability to create purchase orders and bills. Subscriptions, most of you guys know this by now because I've talked about it at length, but you have the ability to offer flexible pricing plans. There's also a customer sign-up page. Not sure if you guys know this. It's called a hosted page. What this is, it's an entire web page that's generated for a sign-up for the subscription. You can actually just take the code and embed it onto your website, and someone can actually sign up on their own for your subscription. So that's a fully automated quote-to-cash process. So there's actually an example, like there's a Zoho company, and I've used their website a ton of times because it's a great example. It's called Filter Snap. They sell like air conditioning filters on a subscription because no one remembers to change those. And what they've done is they have some functionality on the front end, right, on their website where they choose, whether I want a 3-month recurring subscription or 6-month, and then it takes you to a page that shows the sign up for that particular subscription from Zoho. So that's all an option that's available within Zoho subscriptions. All right, Zoho Checkout, I mentioned this. This is a really simple application that has a payment page that you can post on social media. You can embed it onto your website. This is a payment page for one specific product or service. So imagine going to a trade show, you're selling like this one thing, and you want an iPad that people can put their information in and sign up. So the difference between Zoho Checkout and a product like Zoho Books is that in Zoho Books, you'd have to have the customer's information, right? You would then generate an invoice and then send it to them, and then they would pay it. In Zoho Checkout, they could take in the information all at the same time. The price is already pre-selected for whatever they're purchasing, and then they can simply hit submit and make that payment, enter their credit card info. If you do have a nonprofit and they're receiving donations, you can simply make that a field that the customer can choose how much they want to donate. So I've seen like a bunch of churches use Zoho Checkout, and then the integration with Zoho Books allows you to recognize that as donation revenue in your accounting system. Very simple product. Definitely recommend taking a look at that. So payment acceptance, there are actually a dozen different payment gateways as of today. These are just a few. Stripe is integrated really well into Zoho Books. There are, of course, some other ones. Square has a really interesting integration. There's actually a further integration on top of Square than a traditional payment gateway. The way that that works is that many of you know Square acts as essentially as a point of sale, and Zoho Books the following day will import all the transactions from Square and generate invoices for those, and then so you can go and match all those transactions. It'll create a Square clearing account as it does with Stripe. So there are multiple payment gateways that you can integrate. A couple of them, like Authorize.net, offer ACH integrations, and then I mentioned Forte has a vendor payment option. Also in Zoho Expense, this is different from receiving payments, but in Zoho Expense, there's a Forte integration for direct deposit reimbursements for your employees for their expense reports. So Forte is integrated across both Books and Expense for that. Of course, setting up payment reminders. This is something that you will notice in Books, in inventory, in subscriptions. You can do this in a number of places. You can also use the automation module. In settings, right, the gear icon, there's an automation module where you can set up a workflow, the same that you would do in CRM. So a workflow is an if-then statement, right? So if some criteria is true, then we'll execute an action. The actions can be an email alert, right? Whether that's sent out to someone inside of our organization or to a customer. Another action is a field update. So I can update like the notes and terms and condition field on an actual invoice itself or a sales order. We just came out with a new action, which is an in-app notification. So if you want someone else who logs in or yourself to see a notification pop up on Zoho Books, you can do that as well. Another action is a custom function. So you could actually write your own function to execute some set of actions. So for example, if I wanted to automatically apply a 5% discount on all invoices over $10,000, I could write a custom function that recognizes whenever an invoice is over $10,000 and automatically apply a 5% discount into the discount field. I can actually code that in. And then there's one more option, slightly less used, which is called a webhook. But basically what that does is it notifies some third-party service, and you can typically send like some URL parameters, for example, a phone number, and you can do a text message that's sent out. Of course, I mentioned we just did an SMS integration, so you don't need to do that anymore. But so automation, go check out the automation module. This is something that's really simple. So you can set up a automation. This is for a recurring invoice, I believe, where you can automatically create, approve, charge, and send an invoice if some action occurs. On estimates, if a customer goes and accepts an estimate, you can also trigger the invoice to automatically be created and sent to the client. So you can set up all of these pre-filled rules as well. This is not part of the automation module. There's some functionality we've already baked in. And then retry online payments. This applies to recurring invoices and Zoho subscriptions. If there is a failed payment, it'll retry a number of times. You have a process set up where you send the first email to a client. If it fails again, you send a second email that's slightly more rude, and then you get one that's even more rude. But you can do that. Travel and expense. Travel and expense management inside. All right, so managing expenses in Zoho Books. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this, but in the Zoho Books mobile app, we actually added the receipt scanning functionality from Zoho Expense into Zoho Books. It does go against the scan, like the number of scans. Zoho Books has like a fixed number of scans that are allowed because it's a little bit more advanced. You can also scan like invoices and purchase orders and sales orders. But Zoho Expense has an unlimited number of receipt scans. We talked about matching bank transactions and then tagging expenses. So reporting tags are available in basically every transaction inside of Zoho Books or inventory. So whether you're recording an expense, I can group that into a tag. Just to clarify, right, a tag is a completely custom and arbitrary grouping that you'd like to create. A really simple example, we had a client who attended a previous Zoho seminar, and they had a business that they sold medical devices, and they also had medical services they offered. It was one entity, but they wanted to be able to categorize the expenses for those individually and understand the revenue for those individually. You can create a tag that applies to individual items or services in your inventory, or you can even apply a tag to a customer, so all of their transactions get grouped into that. And then you can do that with expenses and bills as well, and journal entries. that allows you to then run a report that is separating out those different divisions. Managing expenses, we talked about this. This is primarily for employee expense management. Expense approvals is the main part of this application, right? So actually creating a system that has a hierarchy, and then also policy enforcement. So the policy enforcement can be things as granular as every expense over $25 needs a receipt, or you can give maximum gross amounts per category. So they can't spend more than like $100 a day in the meals and entertainment category, or $1,000 for flights, or for hotels or so on. So you can set up policies and apply those to the individuals inside of the organization. Banking and reconciliation. So inside of Zoho Books, there's a couple ways. You can either import bank statements. Of course, you can automate the bank accounts to come in. There is I'll tell you, straight up, there's a third-party integration that we utilize to bring in transactions into Zoho Books. For the most part, you can get those transactions coming in without a problem. We have some direct integrations we've set up too, which makes it pretty simple to match those transactions. But of course, you can manually import bank statements as well. Categorizing transactions. So Zoho Books immediately will try to find the most relevant transaction to what you are looking at from your bank statement. So if it's a withdrawal, it's going to try to find a bill or expense that's the same amount and around that same date. Similarly, for a deposit, it will do the opposite. Although you can also set up transaction rules that help to pre-categorize transactions from your bank statement with transactions you've recorded inside of your account. You then do have to go and confirm them, but it will list that as a best match for you. And then you can also run a reconciliation. So you enter the closing balance from your bank statement, and you can go through and clear out all of the transactions from that period. You can then lock the account for that reconciliation. All right, so just want to do a quick high level on a couple things. So one of the big focuses of Zoho Books, right, being able to do mobile accounting right from your phone. You can actually generate transactions, add new customers. There are, of course, things that you do have to fire up your computer for, things like matching bank statements. That functionality is primarily in the full desktop or full web app. But from your phone, you can do quite a bit. Also managing your chart of accounts. This is something that you'll notice you can customize. You can import this from other systems, right? So if you have a CSV, although I do have some webinars that I can share with you that I've done on migrating accounting systems. Actually, if you Google migrating from QuickBooks to Zoho Books, there's a webinar I did with a QuickBooks Pro Advisor. And we talk about some of the things you have to be aware of. For example, Zoho uses, I believe, a account name as revenue, and Xero uses like income. And so there's some differences there that you have to be aware of. But if you're methodical and you read through all of the import files and the definitions, you'll get there. And then, of course, leveraging a multi-currency general ledger is possible inside of Zoho Books. There is an automatic exchange rate feed that you can override. So on a particular transaction, if you need to put your own exchange rate, you can. Or you can also import your own exchange rate file if need be. So a couple things. We talked about this quite at length, which is the integrated accounting, right? Syncing all customer data. One thing that I wanted to mention is the second bullet, so deals closed. So you can set up a trigger from that module so that at a certain stage, it'll create an estimate or approve the estimate. Or at a certain stage, like closed won, it'll automatically create an invoice in Zoho Books. You can actually connect the system in those ways. So that is something that you can set up from the integrations page inside of Zoho Books. You'll find that information listed there. You have the ability to integrate all the sales documents across all the systems we talked about, automatically invoice customers. And then projects. So I wanted to mention this real briefly for those who use Zoho projects. We've actually just enhanced this integration quite a bit. So if you're actually creating an invoice inside of Zoho Books from the invoice module, there's a drop down at the top right, and you can actually fetch or pull from Zoho projects now. That'll bring that entire project into Zoho Books. That gives you the ability to invoice that project as those billable hours are coming up. Of course, inside of Zoho projects, you can also generate those invoices, and you may have seen this functionality as well. For those that are still exploring whether to use Zoho Books or Zoho Projects. Zoho Books is primarily a very simple project management tool. You can bill by task hours, by staff hours, by the entire project hours, or you're just keeping track of hours for a fixed cost project, designed to be very simple. Of course, you can record expenses against the project and even do a budget for the project itself. Zoho Projects, on the other hand, is a really sophisticated, it has everything and the kitchen sink in terms of project management, milestones, Gantt charts, basically the whole 9 yards. So if you want to use a tool like that, you can integrate that back into Zoho Books. And then I wanted to mention this. We talked about this is now called analytics, but you have the ability to import multiple books accounts and analyze that data there. Very quickly, let's finish this up. So in our multiple editions for Zoho Books, there is the ability to record sales tax. Of course, in the US, you can manually record sales tax, or you can use an integration with a company called Avalara. So Avalara is it's a bear. It has a ton of information and functionality. They get super granular, right? So based on the billing address on the invoice itself, when you save that invoice as a draft, the integration pulls in the exact tax amounts and places it onto that invoice in Zoho Books. So then you don't have to worry about calculating taxes based on where your customers are located. And if you have Nexus in a lot of states, and with the recent decisions right from the Supreme Court, it's more and more likely that you do have Nexus in more states. Avalara is a good solution to take a lot of that pain away from managing sales tax. And then financial reporting. So across the finance applications, you'll find over 100 different reports that you'll need. Zoho Analytics adds in another 80 reports pre-built in, and then that's not including all the reports that you can just create using all the raw data that's being brought in from the finance tools. Of course, we talked about with subscriptions, you can monitor key SaaS metrics. Using analytics, you can create dashboards. This is one of the coolest things I think you can do in both CRM and in Zoho Analytics. So in CRM, if you're integrating your Zoho Books and CRM accounts, you can do all sorts of really cool blended reports that bring in finance data into your CRM application. So I mentioned a really basic one, which was just matching total sales transactions with expense data, but you could also do things like monitoring the profitability of a salesperson, right? So something that a CRM system would not have information on, you can actually pull that data from your accounting system, create a dashboard for that. So some really neat stuff there. And some of our other editions have an audit trail. So real quick, we talked about financial reporting across Zoho Books, subscriptions, and then this rounds out all of the modules in the finance suite. And thank you so much.